Hi, I'm Chakradeep, Program Manager in Visual Studio team. In this session, you will learn how to use the App for SharePoint project template in Visual Studio 2013 to build an app using MVC as your remote web application project, write some sample code to interact with a document library in SharePoint, and publish the app to Windows Azure using the new Publish Manager. Let us start by creating a new App for SharePoint project in Visual Studio 2013. In the project creation wizard, you start by specifying the SharePoint developer site for your app development. Let us quickly go through the available hosting models. Provider-hosted model allows you to choose your own web stack and host your app outside the SharePoint farm. In an auto-hosted model, your app gets provisioned for you and deployed for you automatically in Windows Azure. If you simply want to host your app in SharePoint, then you can choose SharePoint hosted as your hosting model. For this demo, let's go with the default option, which is provider hosted, and click next to continue. As we chose provider hosted as our hosting model, we will also need to specify a remote web application that will be deployed along with the app. This remote web application represents the remote components that are hosted on another server. Prior to Visual Studio 2013, you were able to create apps for SharePoint using ASP.NET Web Forms application. Now in Visual Studio 2013, you can choose between Web Forms and MVC. For this demo, let us select MVC Web Application as our remote web application project and click Next to continue. Before your app can call SharePoint and interact with the SharePoint resources such as document libraries and lists, your app needs to authenticate to SharePoint. If you are building a cloud app such as provider-hosted app where remote components are hosted on another server, OAuth is used as the authentication and authorization flow for the app. In general, access tokens are issued by an OAuth security token service. An example of such security token service is the Windows Azure Access Control Service. If you are building SharePoint on-premises app using HITRUST, you can choose to authenticate your app using a certificate. For this demo, we will use Windows Azure Access Control Service as our authentication mechanism to authenticate our app with SharePoint. When you click Finish, your app for SharePoint is created and you get two projects: the App for SharePoint project and the MVC project. The App for SharePoint project contains information about the app that you specify in your app manifest. The MVC web project represents the remote web application project for your app. Let us quickly go through the MVC web project that was just created. This is a default project created out of the box and has one home controller and three views associated with this home controller. The sample code in the index view creates a SharePoint context for the host web and retrieves the username from SharePoint and displays it in the view. Let us debug the app to see how it looks. During debugging, your web application, which is the MVC web application project, is deployed locally to IIS Express in your developer machine, and your app for SharePoint is deployed to the SharePoint developer site. As the app needs to authenticate to SharePoint, you should also allow the app to access basic information from SharePoint. Click Trusted to continue. As you can see, the MVC start page is customized for App for SharePoint and provides helpful links to kickstart your app development. Let's revisit the sample code again. The default project template provides a set of APIs that help you to easily query and interact with SharePoint resources. SharePoint context filter attribute, applicable to MVC applications, performs additional processing to get the standard information such as app web URL and host web URL from SharePoint when your app is being redirected. It also determines whether the app needs to be redirected to SharePoint for the user to sign in. SharePoint Context Provider is a group of classes that provide a set of APIs that relieve you from the tedious steps of dealing with the remote web to SharePoint communication, such as creating the right context. Let us now add a document library to our app and write some sample code to interact with the document library in our MVC web application. So here's our project documents document library with title and a priority field that we just added to our App for SharePoint project. So in my MVC project, I've written the code that will help me to retrieve all the documents from this document library from the SharePoint. So to start with, I added a simple class called SharePoint service that will help me to talk back to SharePoint. This class has two methods, get username and get project documents. Get username is pretty much the same sample code you saw in the home controller just before that retrieves or that pulls the current username from SharePoint. Get project documents method uses the standard CSOM code to interact with the document library, the project documents, and retrieve all the documents from that library. So back in my home controller, I have modified the sample code to include the code to call the SharePoint service methods get username and get project documents. As you can see here, I'm just creating a camel query that will bring back the fields, title and priority, so I can query them back in my application. And then I return the list of project documents back to the view. Going to the view, which is the index view, which is the default view for this MVC application, I have modified the code to render the list of documents as a table. MVC5 uses Bootstrap for its HTML and CSS based design classes. It makes it easier to build great looking apps with Bootstrap very easily. As you can see here, I've used Bootstrap CSS classes and then used for each to enumerate my documents and display them in the table accordingly. Let's debug the app to see how it looks. And here is our sample app. It displays the documents that are available in the project documents library with an icon. And you can click on the document to open it in the respective Office client. So here you can see I'm opening a PowerPoint and I get the Contoso shared vision document from the SharePoint app web inner library in my app. Now that you have a working app, you may now want to publish your app to your App Store or to your corporate app catalog. To publish your app, right-click your app for SharePoint project and select Publish. The new Publish Manager in Visual Studio 2013 helps you get all the required packages ready for publishing. It highlights three key things: deploying your remote web project, packaging the app, and finally submitting your app to the Office Store. Since we chose to build a provider-hosted app, we need to publish both the app for SharePoint package and the remote web application to a hosted server. It is always recommended you deploy your web project first before deploying your app package. For this demo, let us deploy our web application, which is the MVC web project, to a Windows Azure website. All you need to publish to your Windows Azure website is a Windows Azure Publish Profile Settings, which you can download it from your Windows Azure dashboard. To start publishing process, I first create a new profile. Here, since I'm publishing to Windows Azure website, I can import my Publish Profile settings that I just downloaded from Windows Azure. Click Next. For a remote app to interact with SharePoint using OAuth, an app identity includes a client ID and a client secret. You can get the client ID and client secret by registering your app in the App Store. You can click the Help topic in the wizard for more information on obtaining the client ID and the client secret. If you want to publish your app to your dev site instead, then you will need to obtain these values by registering the app using the appreg.new.aspx page. Let's go to my appreg.new.aspx page that I have just opened here in my another tenant. As you can see, I can generate the client ID, the client secret, and provide information about my app title and the app domain. This would be your remote URL, which is the web application project URL. I can click Create to create the app in the dev site. This will now help me to package and deploy my app in this dev site, just like I would do in the App Store. Let's copy the client ID and the client secret into the wizard. And click Finish. Now that we have specified the destination for our remote web application to be deployed, we can deploy our web project. So here I'm deploying it to my Windows Azure website. Now that we have deployed our remote web application to Windows Azure website successfully, the next step is to package the app. So here you can see that you specify the destination URL and the client ID, which should be the same client ID you entered previously in the deploy wizard. Click Finish, and Visual Studio will package the app and open the location for you to upload this app to the dev site. Let's go back to our dev site where we created the app in the app.reg new.aspx and deploy this app to see how it looks. So I can select New App to deploy, upload the app package that we just created, and deploy this app package to the dev site. So now that our app has been deployed, I can click on the app to go to my Windows Azure website, and that will load the documents from the document library we just deployed to our app. There you go. Now we have our app redirected to a Windows Azure website where we deployed our MVC project, and that loads the documents from the project documents document library we created in the SharePoint app web. To summarize, SharePoint development in Visual Studio 2013 makes it easy to build cloud apps for SharePoint by allowing you to choose your choice of web application. You can easily interact with SharePoint resources using the new SharePoint context wrapper methods and also customize it to your app requirements. You can also now easily publish the app as well as the remote web application to SharePoint and your desired hosting service respectively using the new Publish Manager. Thanks for watching. For more information, you can visit dev.office.com. Thank you.